different Christians, different Christian traditions, different folks, different communities have different ideas about what happens to us after we die. Some are solidly grounded in historical Jewish and Christian ideas. We fall asleep, as it were, and someday there will be a resurrection. We will be woken up again, and we will come face to face with God. Others are a little more Platonic in terms of, actual Plato. There's a spirit within us, and where our body is laid to rest, that spirit goes immediately before God to be judged and to go to whatever is next. And there are all sorts of nuances, all sorts of combinations, all sorts of other ideas, all sorts of things that go on. And I've told you this before, but I am not especially concerned with what happens to us after we die. I feel like we do the best we can now, and later will work itself out. But one of the things that I notice about all of these different ideas, all of these different theories, all of these different stories is no matter what happens to us, later on, we still have a body. If we are resurrected, we come back with a body. If we move on as spirits, we have some sort of spiritual body. It is, in fact, hard for me to imagine myself without a body. No matter how I think of myself, I have hands and feet, arms and legs, torso, head, all of the bits and pieces and parts, and that makes me wonder, especially as I get older, which body I will have later. I just turned 47, and I know for a fact that this body is not the same body I had when I was 37. It is not the same body I had when I was 27. It is certainly not the same body I had when I was 17. And it is not the same body I had when I was 7. It will not be the same body that I will have when I'm 57 or 67 or 77. And this body, while I have been assured it is a temple of the Spirit, has some issues. Some recalls have come up. This body of mine has diverticulosis and high blood pressure, and according to the body mass index, is obese. I have lower back pain. I have middle back pain. I have upper back pain. I have this neck thing that causes headaches and shoulder aches and just kind of pulls everything back and to one side sometimes. I have spring allergies, summer allergies, fall allergies, winter allergies. I have a piece of pencil lead stuck in my knee that you can still see through the skin. And another one in my hand that you can't anymore. So that's probably fine. I have cuts and bruises, a little callus on my finger where I used to hold a knife every day when I was a cook. And I've got the other stuff, the stuff that stress brings and anxiety brings. All of those things that you can't see, but that the body remembers and stores up. Little bits and pieces, little aches and pains, little surprising nudges, where my body says, you cannot do that thing you thought you could. Bodies work that way. They hold on to stuff, and all of us, every one of us, every last one of us carries the marks of life in our bodies. And some of those are great, and some of those are wounds. Wounds that show up one way or another. Some that are visible, some that are not. Some that we share, some that we don't. All of us carry stuff. And since we are in this sermon series, this queer gospel sermon series, since we are talking some about LGBTQ folk, we should talk some about wounds that are not exactly specific to them. Wounds that all of us carry in one way or another, but are a little more common. But I need to start with something else before I get to that. I need to do one more thing before I get there and talk about this. According to the Trevor Project, which collects statistics every year, 68% of LGBTQ youth and 73%, specifically of trans and non-binary youth, report finding accepting communities online. The internet can be a powerful tool for people who need to make connection, who cannot find connection where they are. 52%, or 54%, for trans and non-binary find those communities at school. So about half find an accepting community at school. 40%, 38% for trans and non-binary, at home with their parents and their siblings. 36% or 39% at work, wherever that may be. And 3% LGBTQ find an accepting community in their religious communities. 3%. Churches overall are not welcoming places, are not affirming places, are not friendly places, are not places where you share your stuff if you don't want to get hurt, if you don't want more wounds. On to the wounds. 59.4% of LGBTQ plus youth, including 62.6% of trans and non-binary youth, report being teased or bullied last year. 51.7, or for that more specific group, 55.6, report being teased or bullied specifically because of their orientation or identity. Youth are bullied for all sorts of reasons, and this is one of them. 56.9% of LGBTQ youth report being harassed in the last 30 days, including 18% who have been physically harmed, whose wounds are on their bodies for sure. 66% of LGBTQ plus youth, including 71% of trans and non-binary youth, reported symptoms of anxiety last year. 53% or 59% reported symptoms of depression. 39% or 46% seriously considered suicide. And you know the number that's coming next. 12% of LGBTQ plus youth, or 14% of trans and non-binary youth, or including 14%, actually attempted suicide. But LGBTQ plus young people who had access to affirming spaces report lower rates of attempting suicide compared to those who did not. Let me say that again. LGBTQ plus young people who had access to affirming spaces, online, at school, at home, at work, report lower rates of attempting suicide compared to those who did not. I need to make an aside here. This right here is why we talk about this. Every time I mention LGBTQ people in a sermon, and certainly when I decide to do a whole sermon series on a queer gospel, somebody says, why do we have to talk about this? Why does this come up? Why do you feel the need to preach about this? And the reason is right there. The reason is right there. 3% of LGBTQ youth find an affirming space within a religious community. More find affirming spaces elsewhere, but not nearly enough. And if you want to Google LGBTQ plus DeWitt, you will find very few results for places that are affirming. For places where a young person can go and not just not hear about it, not just not be bothered about it, not just not get hurt a little bit more about it, but actually be told that they are loved and worthy of love. And we're one of them. And we're really on like page 3 of the results after all of the news stories about what is happening in Iowa and in the United States and around the world to cause more wounds, to cause more hurt. And we just might be the place. We just might be the phone number that somebody calls. That is enough of an interruption that they don't do the thing that they were thinking about doing. Talking about this, being an affirming space, being an affirming community, being a caring community, being a church that says you are loved and worthy of love, being one of the 3%, might just mean fewer dead kids. And I believe firmly and passionately and without a doubt that Jesus is on the side of fewer dead kids. And I'm going to be on the side of fewer dead kids. So we talk about it. Because it is by talking about it that people know who we are and what they can find here. And maybe, just possibly find an affirming community that they need in order to keep going, even as they bear the wounds that they bear. That is why we talk about it. But that, of course, is an aside. An important aside, but an aside nonetheless. Because there's another part of this message. It's not just that we are affirming. It's not just that we care. It's not just that this is important to us. It's that Christ is affirming. And here's how I know that Christ affirms a bunch of stuff. Because in our reading today, Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ is with the disciples. First with 11 of them, and then with 12. First with 10 of them, and then with 11 of them. Got to remember that one is still missing. And Christ, who has died, Christ who has risen, Christ who could have a new body, Christ who has not been recognized by people before this day, Christ can show them the holes in his hands, the wound in his side. Christ is resurrected with his wounds. They are part of him. No fresh new body back when he was 17. The body that he has. And as we continue through Scripture, sometimes we see Jesus as we like to imagine Jesus, whole and hale and healthy, and sometimes we see Jesus as Jesus has maybe always been since the beginning. Wounded and bleeding and carrying all of the stuff. When we meet him in the book of Revelation, he is like a lamb who has been slaughtered. When he comes to battle the forces of sin and death and everything that makes life last, he is covered in blood. Christ bears his wounds. They are part of him. Just as much as all my stuff is part of me. Just as much as all of your stuff is part of you. We are not somehow separate from our bodies with all of the stuff that they bring, with all of the recalls that have been issued, with all of the junk that we carry. That is all part of us. That is all part of what makes us us. But Christ has redeemed even those. Christ has redeemed even that. Christ has taken those wounds and made them holy, made them sacred, made them something more than what they were. And knowing that, having faith in that, trusting in that, might just be the thing that helps us bear them. I can go forth knowing that even the stuff that tears me down, Christ will use to build me up. And yes, it's true that wounds need to heal. Yes, it's true that wounds need to get better. Yes, it's true that things need to happen. We shouldn't go around just hurting, and we shouldn't seek out hurt just to be made holy. But everything that I am and everything that has happened to me, everything that you are and everything that has happened to you, everything that Christ is and everything that has happened to Christ, it's part of who I am, part of who you are, part of who Christ is, part of who we together are, part of the world. And Christ can look at each of those wounds, each of those cracks, each piece of that brokenness, fill it in with gold, fill it in with love, make them part of the beauty of the world that is. Part of the world that is becoming, part of whatever will be next. And so whatever wounds we carry, we can turn over to Christ, trusting that these too will be made whole, will be made holy. And that with our wounds, with all that we are, we will abide in God's reign of love. Thanks be to God.